Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zane here, and today I have another individual Pokemon analysis as part of my VGC 2015 individual Pokemon analysis series, where I basically cover some of the most common Pokemon in VGC 2015 and tell you everything you need to know about that Pokemon. As always, if you enjoy the series and want to see more videos like this, please show your support by leaving a like on the video and commenting. It really means a lot to me, and to everyone who left positive feedback on the Cresselia video yesterday, it really means a lot. Thank you all, and I'm glad a lot of you enjoyed it. And if you have not watched that, definitely check it out. I'll link it in the description below. Today we'll be talking about Bisharp, which is currently one of the most common Pokemon in VGC 2015, and I expect it to stay that way for a very long time. So first, a look at his base stats. He gets 65 HP, 125 attack, 100 defense, 60 special attack, 70 special defense, and 70 speed. So his base stats are pretty mediocre actually. Obviously defensively it just can't take hits. 65 HP and 70 special defense makes it so that even unboosted Rotom Wash Thunderbolts from like Calm Nature, 0 special attack and 2-hit KO it. 100 defense is okay, it's pretty nice, but the thing is, a lot of the common physical attacks that attack Bisharp are typically super effective. You'd imagine they're ground type or fighting type like Kangaskhan's Power Up Punch or Garchomp or Landorus T's Earthquake, so the thing is, it's not really going to help you survive many attacks there. 70 speed allows it to outspeed some of the slower Pokemon like Azumarill and Sylveon, but you're still outsped by a lot of the more popular Pokemon like Charizard, Kangaskhan, Landorus T, Thundurus, etc. Attack of 125 is really nice, but it's not, so great to the point where you're like, wow, that's a fantastic attack stat. It's good, but the thing is you're not picking up KOs a lot of the time unless you have a attack boost. So based off its base stats, why even use Bisharp? Why is it so common? Well, it's basically used for two reasons, its ability and its typing. Defiant scares off Intimidate users, and obviously for those that don't know what Defiant does, if your opponent has a way to decrease one of your stats, then Bisharp gets a free +2 attack boost. So if your opponent brings in an Intimidator against Bisharp, it's going to decrease one attack stage based off the Intimidate, and then Defiant gets you to a free +1. Also, it also scares off attacks like Icy Wind, because if your opponent chooses to Icy Wind Bisharp, it actually gets a free +2 attack boost, which is really, really nice. So its main point is to scare off Intimidate users, and of course Landorus T and Salamence are some of the more common ones, but you also see Mawile, Scrafty, Hitmontop, etc. It makes the team preview game a lot harder for your opponent, because you can't just carelessly lead with those Pokemon. If you do, your opponent may just capitalize off it. Bisharp's typing of Dark and Steel is fantastic, even though it gets a fair amount of weaknesses to some of the more common types, like obviously Ground, Fire, and Fighting. It's still really, really strong because of the move pool it gets. Stab boosted, as I'll mention later, Iron Head, Knockoff, and Sucker Punch are just fantastic. It's a decent speed tier. It outspeeds a lot of the Pokemon it tries to counter. Sylveon is a big one, but Cresselia and Aegislash. Stab boosted Iron Head, Knockoff, and Sucker Punch are basically huge. There are very few Pokemon in the format that can take those attacks by resisting them, and basically all the common Pokemon you see are hit neutrally or super effective by one of those two types, so they're really, really good, and they're just strong attacks as well. Knockoff is a really, really good attack, maybe one of the best ones in VGC now, because it eliminates crucial items such as berries and choice items, and on a Pokemon like Bisharp, which of course is Dark type, you also get the same type attack bonus boost, so it becomes really powerful, if not maybe the most powerful common Knockoff user we see. Priority boosted Sucker Punch allows you to still hit Pokemon that are faster than Bisharp, like Kangaskhan, like Thundurus, like Landorus T, which is really nice because otherwise they can just KO you beforehand. Sucker Punch paired with Defiant is really threatening because your opponent knows if you get a free +1 boost and if you have an item like Life Orb and Choice Band, you might just be able to pick up KOs before their Pokemon can do anything. So Sucker Punch is really helpful in Bisharp. And of course it counters common threats like Cresselia, Aegislash, and Sylveon as I mentioned earlier, so it's kind of used to check some of the more popular Pokemon. Common Bisharp builds, there's really only one very standard Bisharp build, and that's Adamant Nature with the EV spread of 4 HP, 252 attack, and 252 speed to maximize damage output. Occasionally you might see the rare Jolly variant to outspeed Pokemon around its speed. For example, bulky Rotom tends to not have any speed investment, but some people like to put some speed just to get the speed creep on Adamant Max Speed Bisharp. So some people like to run Jolly as a result to get the speed creep on that kind of Rotom. But in my opinion, it's not as strong, and you really should be aiming to get as much damage off as possible, because 125 attack, while nice, is, not that great, and if you're Jolly Nature, it's going to be even less damage output every turn. It's rare to see defensive EV since Bisharp is already quite frail. Maybe you'll see some put into HP and or special defense to take unboosted, like Rotom Thunderbolts or Thundurus Thunderbolts, but the thing is Bisharp is probably going to be 2-hit KO'd if not 1-hit KO by super effective attacks, and even neutral attacks 2-hit KO it, so it's really rare to see Bisharp run defensive investment. The most common items as of right now are Life Orb and Focus Sash by far. Those two take up basically 90-95% of all Bisharps, and very rarely you'll run into the Choice Band, Choice Scarf, or Lumberry variant. Those are items you can expect, but the first two are by far the most common. The standard moveset is Iron Head, Sucker Punch, Knockoff, and Protect. It's really rare to deviate from that, but here are a couple of other moves you may see occasionally. Assurance, which picked up popularity at the end of VGC 2014, and of course Assurance's damage increases if you attack the Pokemon being targeted with an attack and it takes damage before. So for example, if you have an Aerodactyl, which actually was a combination used by Sejong Park at his tournaments in Korea, you can Rock Slide and then Assurance to pick up KOs immediately, and Rock Slide also breaks Focus Sash. So Assurance is a nice move to use when you have dual attack users, for example Rock Slide, Hyper Voice, Heat Wave, etc. Low Kick is kind of nice to hit the Pokemon weak to fighting, like Tyranitar and Kangaskhan. Swords Dance is a pretty rare move, but some people like to use Swords Dance so then they get to a free +2 and then spam Sucker Punch left and right. And then Night Slash, Quick Guard, Taunt, and Stone Edge, really not used that often, but occasionally you might be running into one of these. I'd say it's really rare to see these moves. Most people tend to not deviate from the standard set, but you should at least expect them. There's a good chance, not a good chance, but a slight chance you'll run into them. So here's a sample set, one I've been running since basically the format was released. Focus Sash, Bisharp with Defiant, level 50 obviously, 4 HP, 252 attack, 252 speed, Adamant Nature, Knockoff, Iron Head, Sucker Punch, and Protect. The only change I make to this is putting Life Orb on the Bisharp, but otherwise I keep the moveset and the EVs exact same because there's really no reason to change them. They're really solid and there's, like I said, just not much reason to deviate from it. It's very simple, yes, but it basically does everything you need it to because Bisharp is kind of like a glass cannon and it's so frail. So here are a couple of damage calculations I've got listed for you, just because you might want to decide what item you want to run on your Bisharp. This is with the attack knockoff, with the fact that your opponent still has its item. So against Cresselia, which I posted an analysis on yesterday, and I'd say the standard one currently runs a fair amount of defensive EVs to specifically survive Bisharp's attacks. You do 57.3 to 68.1% with the knockoff the first time around. Of course, Cresselia is going to lose its item, so the second time around you actually have a small chance of missing out on a KO if you target Cresselia twice. Against Aegis/Shield, you see it does 75.4 to 89.8%, which is nice because you basically prevent it from setting up a substitute regardless of the damage roll. And of course, this is for a non-boosted Bisharp. Via Life Orb Flea equation, you do a bit more to Cresselia, or considerably more, 74 to 88%. Against Aegis/, you have a very good chance of one-hit KOing, 98.2 to 116.7%. Now, a Choice Band, if the Cresselia is slightly more defensively built, like the one I posted yesterday, chances are they're going to have just enough EVs to survive the CB knockoff. So that's one reason why people tend to go with Life Orb over CB. With Band, you lock yourself into the attack, and you are, yeah, like I said, you're forced to attack, and the thing is, you're still not picking up KOs on things like Cresselia. Of course, against Aegis/, you are guaranteed the one-hit KO, but with Life Orb, you already have a very good chance of one-hit KOing. So that's why we see Life Orb as the most common attack boosting item, but we do see Sash too because it guarantees Bisharp to basically get at least 1 or 2 attacks off. So for EV spread, like I said, it's very rare to see a spread other than the very typical 4, 252, 252. For, bulkier Pokemon, it makes sense to run nice spreads, but for Bisharp, really no reason to. You could, in theory, run a bulkier Swords Dance set, but like I said earlier, keep in mind that Bisharp is weak to some of the most common types in VGC, like Fire, Ground, and Fighting, so it really won't help much. Because of how frail Bisharp is, you should try not leading with it. Try not lead into it, excuse me. If you are playing with Bisharp, basically, you should lead with it or bring it out when one of your Pokemon is KO'd. You never want to switch into Bisharp at any point, because if you do, chances are it's going to get targeted and it's going to break its Focus Sash or just do a lot of damage. There are very few attacks Bisharp can actually safely switch into, so you've got to be careful. Of course, you can switch into it if you're feeling confident about your position, but and I've done that multiple times as well, but in general, you should try to sway away from it. Bisharp is a lot more threatening when it's at full HP and hasn't lost any damage. So just a couple things to keep in mind, but once again, Bisharp is very frail. So what are some good partners for Bisharp, you may be wondering? Well, it can fit on almost any team, similar to Cresselia, because of its speed tier and offensive pressure. It really likes faster partners, though, that can threaten the faster opposing Pokemon. So, it likes being paired with things like Kangaskhan and Charizard, because it can threaten ones that are between the speed range of Bisharp and those fast Pokemon. Helping Hand users, especially Cresselia, can turn its attacks into one-hit KOs. You'd imagine, for example, a Life Orb Helping Hand Sucker Punch can actually do substantial damage, and earlier as I showed you with the damage calculations, Helping Hand basically ups you up a tier. Just having Bisharp on your team scares Intimidate users, like I mentioned earlier, so it makes leading with your physical type attackers a bit easier, which is why we see Bisharp paired with a lot of physical type attackers. And the top 10 partners for Bisharp right now on Battlespot are Kangaskhan, Talonflame, Landorus T, Sylveon, Salamence, Rotomwash, Amoonguss, Gardevoir, Zapdos, and Garchomp. So just to give you some ideas on Pokemon that synergize well with Bisharp and what people are currently using on Battlespot. So how do you beat Bisharp? Well, Kangaskhan is one of my favorite ways if you are running Mega Kangaskhan because it can outspeed it and one-hit KO it through Focus Sash. If you're running Power Up Punch as well, you get a free +2 boost while picking up a KO, and that's really good. But fighting type Pokemon in general are really nice. Pokemon like Breloom, Conkeldurr, Lucario all do a fair amount of work. Super effective attacks as well, like I mentioned, Ground, Fire, Fighting. If you just double target Bisharp, honestly, you can KO it because it is almost always 2-hit KO'd by neutral type attacks. You can also burn it with Will-O-Wisp. I mentioned Fast Rotom-Wash earlier, and since Jolly Bisharp is pretty rare, you can afford to put some speed into Rotom if you're willing to, so it can outspeed Bisharp. But note that not many Pokemon hard counter Bisharp because Knockoff and Iron Head, as I mentioned earlier, hit almost the entire metagame for neutral damage. So as a result, you should just eliminate it as soon as possible and make sure you don't activate Defiant, regardless. Like, just make sure you don't carelessly end up in a position where you're forced to bring an Intimidator out against Bisharp, and don't carelessly Icy Wind if you do have Icy Wind on your team because, of course, Bisharp can take advantage of that. So in conclusion, Bisharp is currently one of the most popular Pokemon in VGC 15, despite how simple it is, and it's going to stay around. If you're using Bisharp, make sure you don't waste turns by using attacks like Sucker Punch into attacks like Protect, Tailwind, and Substitute. It's very common for people to avoid, taking damage from Bisharp and picking up KOs with the opposing Pokemon on the side. For example, if I have an Aegislash and a Rotom, just, example, sometimes people are tempted to just attack into one of the Pokemon. That Pokemon may Protect and the other one can get a lot of damage off, so the key thing about using Bisharp is that you're using it effectively, and you don't want to waste any turns because if you do, you're just going to take up damage and it's going to fade very quickly. Knockoff is one of the best attacks in the game because it punishes switches heavily, so keep that in mind. Even if Knockoff is used against a Pokemon that's resistant to it, you still remove its item, which is huge. So if you get Bisharp into an advantageous position, a lot of the times you can knock off regardless of whether the Pokemon you're knocking off stays in or switches out. Like I said, KOing Bisharp is not difficult, but make sure you get rid of it before it does anything to your team. I'm showing both sides of it. If you are using Bisharp, try to get as much damage off as possible, but if you are playing against it, try to get rid of it before it does too much. And of course, like I mentioned time and time again, don't mindlessly lead with your Intimidators against it. If you feel confident about leading one Intimidator against it, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure your other Pokemon can beat Bisharp. That's why, for example, Kangaskhan Landorus T tends to be a pretty common duo. Even though Landorus T can get the Defiant boost, Kangaskhan can just fake out or Power Up Punch it. So, it's not terrible to lead with Intimidators, but only if you have proper support. So that's basically it for this guide. Bisharp is one of the most common Pokemon in VGC 15. Make sure you know how to beat it. This should help you learn how to beat it or learn how to use it. Basically, the rule of thumb is use it as effectively as possible or beat it as quickly as possible. Anyway, that's it for today's guide, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like if it helped you at all. Share it with your friends, etc. And that's it, guys. I'll see you next time. Peace.